Welcome to another Dispatch Live debate edition, vice presidential style. I'm your host, Sarah Isgur, and of course, I've got Steve Hayes, Jonah Goldberg, and David French joining me. All right, guys, before we get into whether this debate mattered or who won or anything else, let's go back and assess, now that we've watched, what the strategy was and whether they achieved their strategy. David, let's start with you.
I'm going to say my perception of their strategy was that Kamala Harris was going to prosecute the Trump record and that Pence was going to prosecute the Biden plan. And I think they both accomplished their mission. I mean, I think that Harris was pretty effective at times when she leveled, both barrels at the Trump record, with the caveat that to this day, I don't know why they haven't gone harder at the Obamacare debacle, which is they're about to go into court to argue that the whole law should be thrown out, and they don't have a plan. It came up, but I mean, I would think that would be something in the middle of a pandemic that you would just hammer and hammer and hammer. Pence, on the other hand, I think he did a good job. If you're a wavering Republican, like you like Republican policies, but you're really, really, really uncomfortable with Trump's record, so you're kind of thinking about Biden. I thought Pence did a really nice job of saying, hey, this guy he's pretty progressive. I mean, this is a Democrat who's you're not going to agree with. And so I think that they both accomplished that mission. And let me just say, I felt nostalgia. I felt like it was like I was watching like Karate Kid, or something. It was like a blast from the past. I mean, you'd have a good question from the moderator, and then the two candidates would not answer the question and deliver their canned speech. It just felt like,
the good
old times.
Well,
yeah.
It'd be nice. Speaking of which, Jonah.
So the question was the strategy going into it.
What do you now assess their strategy as being, and how do you grade them on their own strategy?
Yeah. I think Pence had a couple different strategies. One was to do what David describes of prosecuting the case against the Biden campaign, in large part to corral wavering Republicans. I don't think anybody who liked Biden, was planning on voting for Biden, was someone that they thought Pence was going to win over. It was really the people who were sort of thinking they're just not going to vote or not going to vote for Trump or something like that. And I think he did pretty good at that. I think that he had another strategic thing that was goal, which was a little closer to home, which was not to make the old man angry. There is a certain kind of spousal abuse thing that runs through Mike Pence, that he just doesn't want, he doesn't want to come home to, Donald Trump, who's standing there with the tire iron or something. And also he wanted to seem presidential for his future ambitions. And I think the first goal, I think he gets close to an A on, if you discount the fact that he didn't answer any questions and wasn't particularly honest a lot of the time, but he did it well. The second goal, not making Trump angry, except for the fact that he attracted a fly to his head, which I don't think Trump will forgive. I think he kind of gets at least a B on that. And in terms of helping his own presidential ambitions, I think it's a push to, I don't know, a C, a gentleman's C.
Steve, we made it 3 minutes without talking about the fly. I feel good about that.
I just wanted to get. I wanted to be first.
How long? I wondered how long it would take. I'm not
surprised.
Not surprised that Jonah went there, right?
Yeah.
I think Kamala did badly, except for the fact that I guess a fourth thing that Pence wants, but Kamala wants even more, is to use this as a fundraising thing. And there are enough little digital shorts that they can take out of this to do fundraising with, and that was probably successful. I don't think she did a particularly good job of defending Biden or making the case against Trump. I thought they were both pretty annoying. I don't want to make this gendered. They were both very annoying by my lights. But I think that she failed to live up to the hype that the left has built up around her as this sort of glorious prosecutor. And she whiffed a couple times. And the fact that she could not and would not answer, despite invoking Honest Abe and saying, okay, I'll answer it, the court packing question, I just thought was malpractice. So I think she actually gets seized across the board, except for the fundraisings thing. I like the effort to redefine court packing as appointing a lot of white guys. I thought that took chutzpah. But other than that, I thought she did pretty poorly.
I think basically each side probably pleased their own supporters. So Mike Pence and his answers, whether he was defending Donald Trump or criticizing Joe Biden, probably had a lot of Republicans nodding their heads along with his answers across the country. Kamala Harris is the same way for Democrats. And in that sense, look, it's a vice presidential debate. So I think the normal conventional wisdom would be in a race where you're now talking about a gap of roughly 10 points in the 538 polling average. The big question is there anything big that happened that upset the race? And I would say the answer to that is no. And even if something big had happened, it's the vice presidential debate. And while I think there's more scrutiny on this debate potentially than on previous vice presidential debates because of the age, which Susan Page brought up, I don't think this. We're going to look back on November 3rd or November 4th and say, boy, was that vice presidential debate that really made the difference here.
Well, remember the fly.
People might remember the fly, particularly if you keep bringing it up. I think Jonah's point about Kamala Harris just whiffing or just sort of aggressively sidestepping some of the questions that came her way, particularly on court packing, but she did it on the abortion question. She did it on several questions. So did Mike Pence. I mean, Mike Pence, it got to the point where I would laugh when Mike Pence would answer. He didn't even pretend to answer any of the questions that Susan Page was asking. She would ask about abortion and he would talk about Soleimani. And this happened every single time. And, I think sometimes it was strategically wise for him to have done that. I also thought that Pence spent a lot more time than he should have going back and re-defending Donald Trump on certain things. If I'm Mike Pence and I've got to defend something like the president's response to coronavirus, I want to do that once and never speak of it again. And we're an hour in and Mike Pence is going back and bringing up, like out of nowhere, bringing up the coronavirus and the White House response to that. But it would have been much, much smarter to sort of walk away, leave that alone. Let's not talk about that anymore.
Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah, so I thought that it was very clear to me that the Biden team went into this knowing that they didn't want anything to change in this race. And it was a very clear do no harm strategy. So they needed Harris's tone and mannerisms to be just sort of, frankly, as boring as possible. They didn't want her to be the hard charging prosecutor that she had been in the Kavanaugh hearings, for instance. They wanted her to be sort of the minimum amount of good required to not make a ton of headlines about how bad she was, but they are fine with headlines about her not answering the questions, for instance. What they did not want was, Biden-Harris ticket going to pack the court. Biden-Harris fine with abortion after babies are born. So they were basically willing to lose this debate on the margins because it wasn't going to matter unless they lost the debate. And I thought the Pence team, to some extent, knew that they would want some trajectory change in here, that this was an audition, if you will, for 2024 primary potentially. So I did think he was a lot more substantive. I agree with you, Steve, that obviously he didn't answer a lot of the questions too. But I agree with David that how refreshing to be back in 2012. How I missed you. You had two politicians on stage, and we haven't gotten to see that in a while. So I thought that Harris executed her strategy well. No one is coming out of this saying, I was going to vote for Biden, but man, now that I've heard from Harris, all the crazy things they're going to do, I can't do it. And I thought from Pence, you came out, to the extent you've only known the Trump administration sort of on television, maybe some tweets, you came out thinking, that Pence guy sure makes the case a lot better than Donald Trump does.
Can I use a football analogy?
If I say
it
no,
remains to be seen.
No, it's a good one. This is a good one. I think Steve's with me on this. You know how it is when your team is trailing late, the starting quarterback has taken a big hit, and the backup quarterback comes in against the prevent defense and hits a couple of like sharp-looking 5-yard passes in the middle of the field. Doesn't really materially change the outcome of the game, but all of a sudden the fans are like, "Oh, the backup QB didn't look so bad." I mean, that's exactly how I felt about this debate.
Yeah, except I hear you. This is a point I keep returning to on the regular Dispatch podcast. Who is Mike Pence's natural constituency now? I mean, I know his bread and butter is being a conventional Republican. I mean, if I can use a pop culture analogy, in the Ocean's 11 movie, when Brad Pitt is trying to explain.
Spoilers. Steve hasn't seen it. It's only 10 years old.
When he's trying to explain to Matt Damon how to play somebody else, he says, "You want to be entertaining but not memorable. You want to be funny but don't make people laugh. You want, that's Mike Pence. He is generic off-brand vanilla, and he wants to be the heir apparent to Donald Trump." And Donald Trump's core base are the people who go to MAGA rallies and cheer and wave flags around and do all that kind of stuff. That's not Mike Pence's audience, and I don't know who he thinks he's going to supplement it with. And
David has an idea.
Okay, and one last point on this, just because I think he won. I think that's sort of indisputable if you're scoring it conventionally. I suspect that among a lot of women voters, his interrupting thing and his grating refusal to listen to Susan Page may either consciously or subliminally or both play pretty badly. And I don't know if that matters given the way the electorate is shaping up at this point, but he is guaranteed for the rest of his life and probably for 7 generations after to have a bad gender gap problem.
By the way, I am reliably informed that I am old and that Ocean's 11 is in fact more like 20 years old.
I was going to say something, but I'm a gentleman.
If I were better, I would come up with a Friday Night Lights analogy so that I could do football and pop culture. But I never saw Friday Night Lights, so I have nothing to add.
We're impressed you even know the name of it.
Pretty good. Pretty good.
So I've got my shot at the constituency. It's evangelicals who feel guilty about supporting Donald Trump. I mean, and he has a very distinct constituency for now. I don't think he has that constituency when Trump's terms are over. I don't think he has that constituency. I think he kind of fades and recedes, but he is the guy who makes people who feel kind of guilty about Trump feel better about voting for Trump. I just think it's that's it.
Look, Mike,
but my point was about moving his political future. Those people aren't going to be voting,
nobody.
Yeah,
not nobody, but not significant.
I don't think Mike Pence did anything to make Donald Trump angry tonight, in all likelihood. But I don't think it's hard for me to imagine that many Republican voters, whether they're sort of Trumpy or whether they're more traditional conservatives or country club Republicans, were watching this debate and immediately thinking that is the guy in 2024. Has to be Mike Pence. It wasn't that kind of a performance. And he's sort of soft-spoken. I think, when he turned to substance, he was more effective than when he was just sort of talking to fill the space. But it wasn't a command performance.
I have a question. Right on the gender gap front, and you're looking at some of these numbers. The gender gap is driving a lot of that senior vote. Trump won seniors by 7 points. Biden's now up 27 in some of these polls with seniors, which is crazy. A lot of that is female seniors. Women make up a majority of voters. And so to Jonah's point about the interrupting, I found it fascinating. I don't know what you guys thought about how you perceived the time that each candidate got, but we have an unofficial time score for the two candidates. And I'm really interested to hear your reactions. But unofficial speaking times, Pence, 35 minutes and 22 seconds. Harris, 38 minutes and 48 seconds. That's not how it felt.
Not what I would have guessed. Not what I would have
And that's a problem for Mike Pence, because it means that even when you're not getting as much time, you still feel like you're interrupting and taking too much time. And to, be the woman in the room here, taking the armrest on the airplane, unacceptable.
Yeah. Well, I think that's.
I have a
hogging the
question for you,
remote.
Sarah.
Are we just going to keep going into gender stereotypes? Yeah, I think, I mean, if you look at Pence didn't really interrupt that much. I would have a slight disagreement with you on that.
Interrupts the wrong
I don't
term,
think
talk over his time, and then
he just kept going.
Yeah. That's what I mean.
He ignored Susan Page and mostly ignored Kamala Harris. He didn't respond to Susan Page's repeated attempts to stop him. And she was like the parent who says, I'm going to count to 3, and then gets to 3 and was just like, here, have some ice cream. I mean, there was no punishment when you got to 3. And so Pence
she said,
understood that
you've been
quickly.
taking more time. And I think she'll get dinged for that. In a, it's not Candy Crowley moment or anything, but she put her thumb on the scale and she was wrong.
I have a style question for you, Sarah, since you're our female focus group of 1.
Yes.
Okay. And Trump has a gender gap problem.
Mm-hmm.
How does the way that Pence talks impact you at all? And here's why I ask. It's a very familiar way. If you spend a lot of time in evangelical churches, it's kind of like, we call it in the house, evangelical breathy voice. It's sort of like very sincere and soft. And it's something that like in church kind of grates on me a little bit. But it's a very common sort of like almost cultural mode of communication. And I just wonder, how does that come across to you?
So part of me was so pumped to be back in 2012 and to hear people with their really horrible, overdone politician cadence. And that's Pence's politician cadence. It comes off as very insincere to me, but so does Harris's. She has a cadence as well. Some of her smarmy moments where she was like, please let me talk, smile. It also came off as very politician, very insincere. Part of me thought, I'm so glad we're back to just politicians being insincere. What a treat. But if we actually lived in 2012, I'd be like, oh, that was so insincere.
Don't we isn't there a happy medium between like the Donald Trump top rope, elbow to the head approach to politics, and then this overly sincere? I mean, there were times when Mike Pence has done this forever. I mean, this is sort of how he talks. And it's, to me, for a guy who's actually like, agree with him or disagree with him on policy matters, he's given this stuff a lot of thought. Like Mike Pence is conversant in basic policy matters, and in some areas he's very conversant. He knows his stuff, and he's not a dumb guy. But the faux sincerity and the biting your lip, there are times when I'm watching Mike Pence and I think, man, Bill Clinton was sincere compared to this.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think there are a lot of it's not just a happy medium. There's just vast swaths of open plains between some of these things, and I just want to just get it on the record that of all of the various breathy voices, evangelical breathy voice is among the least sexy. I just want to put that out there. And but I agree entirely with, I mean, I feel a little liberated in this because I found them both so annoying. I texted in our Slack channel, and I'm not condoning violence in any way, but one of my favorite German words is Backpfeif Engelschicht, which is a very punchable face. And Mike Pence, the way he does that sort of fake hurt feeling, disappointed feeling, the mock outrage, I mean, and the refusal to deal with any of the questions as they are asked. At one point I was joking on Twitter that Page should have tested this by like asking, what's the annual rainfall in Brazil? And just to hear Pence say, Susan, I'm so glad you asked that question. Under Donald Trump's broad-shouldered leadership, we have lowered taxes. It just have nothing to do with the question. But I think that Kamala Harris was really poorly served by the split screen, because Pence basically, for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, goes to turned off Android mode when he's not speaking.
Fly certainly thought so.
And and the fly definitely. And so he just sits there dead faced, and Kamala gets this really bad smirky face, and gets this sort of like, oh, I guess can't wait to answer this question. And as a matter of body language, you're like, okay, she's gonna just drive it in, and then she doesn't. And so it heightens the sense that she whiffed her response in a way that's kind of unfair. But if I were her debate coach, I would tell her, got to remember the camera's on you even when you're not talking. And the fact that she and the best example of this came very early in the night when Pence got angry and offended and said, I wish you wouldn't play politics with the lives of Americans in terms of COVID stuff. That she didn't have, first of all, that her team couldn't have predicted that one coming a million miles away, and she didn't have some sort of, I mean, I understand, I think Sarah makes a good point about, first do no harm and all that kind of stuff. But Donald Trump had said he didn't want those people, those Americans, to get off a cruise ship because it would upset the COVID numbers in the United States. You can come up with a dozen different things that Trump has done where he's played politics with COVID. And to let that one just sail over the plate, that to me was the signal that she wasn't going to try at all to be the person that her fans wanted her to be. And I think she could have gotten a lot closer to that person without going over the line than she
particularly on that question. I mean,
yeah.
she clearly came in with the sort of tone of disappointment, not anger. And she mostly kept it. There were a couple moments where she got a little testy, but she mostly kept it throughout the night. But I thought on the coronavirus stuff, that would have been a point to sort of let the anger fly a little bit. I mean, I think people are angry about some of this stuff, and some of the things that the president has said and done over the course of the past 8-9 months should make people indignant. And she could have gotten away with a little of that. One additional point on the mini speechifying by each of the candidates. But I like Susan Page. I think she's a good journalist, but she didn't ask follow-up questions. And maybe that's the way that this format required her to conduct the debate, although Chris Wallace did manage to ask follow-up questions in a way that I thought was pretty effective when the debate didn't go totally crazy. But you're asking for speech. These are politicians. You're asking for them to give speeches, and speeches off topic if you don't follow up. So she said, here you've got your 2 minutes uninterrupted. And in one sense, you like that because it gives people a chance to develop a little answer, and it's not just all sound bites. On the other hand, they can do what they did tonight, which I think didn't really, while this debate was certainly more substantive than the first presidential debate, I don't feel like we really are leaving with a much deeper understanding of where these two campaigns are.
Okay, David, question to you. Tell me some way in which this debate mattered.
It was a not bad night for the Trump campaign. The first not bad night in a long time. And to the extent that, I mean, at some point, if you're going to have a comeback, it starts with one not bad night. And so I thought, I agree with Jonah. If you're just sort of looking at this purely through conventional debate lens, I feel like Pence had a better night than Harris. I mean, Harris was plainly playing prevent defense, but I thought Pence had a slightly better night. So a comeback has to start with something good, right? I mean, so if I'm going to say, what do you take away from this where it might matter to the extent that it matters? It's a not bad night. And one other thing though, we can talk all day long about tone and how certain aspects of it were irritating or this or that. But one thing just kept going back into my mind was if Trump had been impeached and convicted in January, I think our country would be in a substantially better place. For all of the faults and flaws that I think for all the faults that I think that Mike Pence has, and he wasn't my favorite Republican politician before he was Trump's vice presidential nominee, I think we would be in a substantially better position with the pandemic, and therefore in a substantially better position with the economy had Republican senators not gambled America on an unfit president.
Jonah or Steve, can you name another way in which this debate mattered?
Well, the only life form on the stage that actually strictly adhered to the 2-minute limit was the fly. And they've actually timed it, and I'm right about that. Other than that it mattered. I'll go back to part of my partial answer at the beginning. It might have mattered in terms of fundraising. I could see some of those clips from Kamala Harris playing well with some of the base and raising some money off of that. I could see conceivably Pence's stuff too, but no, I really don't think it matters. In part because Donald Trump is going to be on Fox Business Channel tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And if history's any guide, he will step on whatever momentum they can.
Fun fact, Tevi Troy has, our friend of the pod, Tevi Troy, has emailed me to remind me he wrote extensively about flies relating to presidential politics. Fun fact, White House Chief of Staff Josh Bolten had fly swatters created with the White House logo on them. He distributed them to his staff to cope with the fly problem in the White House back when things were boring.
Well, I mean, Tevi is something of a presidential historian of doohickeys. And I wanted to say doohickey because we have a Twitter follower and Dispatch subscriber who agreed to buy a gift certificate if I worked in the word doohickey on Dispatch Live.
What?
So doohickey, doohickey, doohickey. Thingamabob, Queen Astray, Framfra.
There's three of them. So to answer your question directly, Sarah, I don't think that there are many ways in which this mattered. I did, as I was watching it, and watching Kamala Harris in particular, think about the other choices available to Joe Biden. And I think in retrospect, she fits better than a lot of the other possibilities. You remember he was talking about Stacey Abrams and some others with considerably less experience, and I would argue less poise than Kamala Harris had. And whether you agree or disagree with the substance of her answers, you felt like she belonged. You know, you didn't watch this debate tonight and say like, wow, she couldn't handle the office if something happened to Joe Biden. And I think that's, you know, it's not a huge deal. It's not a huge plus, but if it had gone the opposite way, if it had been Stacey Abrams, who I'm just baffled as to why people find her as impressive as they do. I think there would have been a real risk that she wouldn't have lived up to the seat, lived up to the chair. And in that sense, I think this was, you know, that was probably the best thing to come out of this for
Steve,
Joe Biden.
do you think Amy Klobuchar would have had a better night than Kamala Harris did tonight?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I think Klobuchar's smart. She can be funny. She also has that, I don't know that she would have kept her composure as well as Kamala Harris did tonight.
But she knows how to lose her temper in a Midwestern way, which is the only way to do it against Mike Pence.
Fair.
I thought so, Steve. I think that's a really fascinating point, because the downside that the anti-Harris people were pointing out before she was picked was that she would have her sights so focused on running for president herself that she couldn't be a team player. So for instance, if they told her to go into the vice presidential debate and say, we're winning, we don't want you to score any points, just don't lose any points.
Yeah.
That Harris wouldn't be able to do that. And that, yeah, she would nod her head, but she would go into that room and she would score some points because that's what the expectation was for her. And I think she showed tonight that she's a team player.
Definitely.
And I don't think she went in and bucked the Biden campaign and did what she wanted to do to put herself in a better spot to run for president. I think she was a good soldier tonight. And I think that made for actually a not compelling debate performance for her.
Yeah, there were several times when she sort of awkwardly went out of her way to say, well, Joe Biden, and then, you know, the question would be about her record as a prosecutor, and she would, you know, give 2 sentences on that. This is not an exact example. I don't know if it was in response to this particular question, but then she would quickly turn to Joe Biden believes prosecutors can do X, Y, and Z, and that's why he would be a great president. She did that repeatedly, and it was obvious that she was doing it.
Can I twice tonight, Mike Pence used the phrase, at least twice that I noticed, Mike Pence used the phrase, if you somehow win.
Yeah.
Which I have to think was deliberate, and if it's deliberate, it's kind of sinister, but it maybe also is just a way of making it seem unlikely, not like claiming it'll be stolen or anything like that.
Oh, I
But
took it to push back on the polling. They don't want their people demoralized, so they want
yeah,
the people to
I
feel
think
like
that's the more charitable way to read it, and that's probably right.
All right. Final closing thoughts as we head into the next presidential debate next week. Are there any things that either candidate needs to clean up or adopt from this debate?
Ooh.
Either of the main candidates? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. And the president
for the next debate?
Yeah, meaning at the next debate, are they going to?
No.
Is anything about this debate going to affect that debate?
No, I mean, think about what the discussion has been over the past several days. I mean, it's just all about coronavirus, all about the outbreak that appears to have started at the White House, or in at least affected now almost 36 people at the White House, the president's response to that, the answers to the questions, I think legitimate questions that we don't yet have. That's been the focus. I suspect that'll be the focus in part until we get answers to some of those questions. So it's hard to see how there wasn't a moment in this debate where people will say, boy, we've got to go back and get Kamala Harris's view on the court packing question. It's really a question for Joe Biden, and Joe Biden hasn't answered the question. Same with Mike Pence and coronavirus, I think.
Let me raise.
Go ahead, David. No, go ahead.
Let me raise a question about the next debate. Here is a factor that I think might end up mattering a lot, to the extent, mattering a lot within the context of within the Isgur prism of it's not going to matter a lot, but mattering a lot within the prism of not mattering all that much.
The Isgur prism was Robert Ludlum's least read, but one of his best books. I just want to point that out.
Is Trump coughing? If that, to me, that's going to be a really interesting question. Would he go to the debate if he has a lingering cough? Because every cough would be a reminder of what we've been through over the last couple of weeks, and of the failure of the White House, of the coronavirus containment within the White House itself. So I wonder, he better be really symptom free by the time that debate rolls around. Does he look healthy? Does he look strong? Because the things that we have seen so far have been encouraging in the extent that he's far better off than a lot of people are this far into the disease. He's far better off, and we're thankful for that. But he doesn't look quite right. And even the video he put out, the sheer amount of makeup on his face was well outside the norm. And so, he's going to be on HD cameras for an hour and a half. He better be really healthy. Otherwise, I think that could be one of the decisive story coming out of that debate.
Well, I think if he's not, Joe Biden has basically suggested that he's not going to show up if Trump is still shedding the virus, right?
When he shouldn't.
I think you will have to, they will have to have multiple PCR tests that confirm that he is not still contagious.
Jonah, last word goes to you tonight, but also I know what I'm getting you for Christmas. I don't know if you can see that, but the Joe Biden campaign has already created their fly swatters that say truth over flies.
Clearly on this podcast, I've been the Lord of the Fly. First, to go back to Steve's answer, I think the one place where I disagree is I think Kamala Harris so egregiously handled the court packing question by saying, all right, you want an answer? I'll give you an answer, and then change the subject. That is going to be at the minimum catnip to a lot of conservatives and Republicans, and I think fairly so, because she really put a spotlight on the fact that it is their policy not to answer this question. And she actually tried to do the race card thing back at Pence for raising the question. And I think that heightens it, that gives people a talking point. And so I think at the very least, it gives Donald Trump the ability to say, look, Kamala Harris said she was going to answer it. She hasn't answered, blah, 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 blah. We all saw that. We'll see that clip played a lot on Fox News tomorrow. So I think that that at the margins hurt a little bit.
Can I ask a question and it be the real last question? Am I insane to think that it's kind of smart for them to not answer that question?
Yeah, they can't answer the question.
I think it's smart for them not to answer the question in the sense that I think you're asking the question, but I think they need to come up with some better collection of euphemisms rather than reading their stage direction and saying, if we answer the question, everyone will be talking about our position, which is like a self-own, right? I mean, it's basically saying this is a hugely consequential thing that, people care a lot about, that our textbooks have been telling us for 70 plus years was the worst thing that FDR tried to do other than interning the Japanese, which he actually succeeded in doing. And so therefore, because our base really wants us to do it, we're not going to answer the question because we don't want to talk about it. I mean, points for honesty, but they could come up with something that doesn't show their motivation and the cowardice behind the motivation better. I don't know exactly what that it would be, but they flip-flopped on fracking and all sorts of other things. They could come up with some wiggle locution about court packing too, I think.
But what if they just said, no, we're not going to pack the courts? Do you think that's going to lead to droves of progressives staying home?
I think that would cause a lot of hand-wringing. Yeah.
They could say, as of now, this is a moot question because there aren't the votes to do it. And that implies to the base, if you elect enough Democratic senators, there might be the votes to do it. And it implies to the people who don't want it to happen, oh, that's their escape clause because they don't really want to do it. And the answer happens to be true for both constituencies.
And with that, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has been another edition of the Dispatch Live Debate. So we will do this again for the next presidential debate. Check out thedispatch.com/30 days free. We've still got a little bit of time left, right, Steve?
Yeah, a little 36 hours, I think.
36 hours left to become a full member. Try it out. No risk, no problem. But we will see you after the next debate. Subscribe to the podcast to get a little preview. Talk soon.